Good evening, San Diego. I'm Chief Meteorologist Carlene Chavis, and thank you for tuning in for your CBS 8 Plus weather update. The Santa Ana winds are back. You can feel it when you step outside, that dry air. We have had these humidity values today down into the teens and 20s, and that also includes the coast. So widespread dry air is back in the forecast and, well, making for clear conditions out there, too. Santa Ana winds will stick around all the way through Wednesday of next week, but the strongest wind speeds are expected through the weekend. We have weather impact alert days because of that. And that's why we also have the wind advisory that's been issued by the National Weather Service. It went into effect at 8 a.m. this morning to include the inland valleys, and it's still going for the mountains all the way until 1 p.m. on Sunday. We also have a warm stretch that's in store for us. Ridge of high pressure building in, bringing in heat. It's going to bring our temperatures about 10 to 15 degrees above seasonal for this time of the year. 80s are looking to return to the inland valleys by the middle of next week. But before we get to that point, we got to talk about the chill in the air. We had overnight lows that were in the 30s and 40s this morning. So last night through this morning, feeling that chill, and much of the same as we hit our overnight lows to kick off the weekend. You have widespread 40s in the forecast. 41 degrees for Escondido, the same for Chula Vista. Also talking about 46 degrees for downtown. We still have some of those 30s out there, and so we could be dealing with the potential for some of that patchy frost developing, especially for the inland valleys, at least a few spots. So you have 34 degrees as an overnight low for Ramona, looking at those 30s for Palomar as well as for Julian, so extending into the mountains in the desert when it comes to those 30s, and below freezing at 27 degrees for Mount Laguna. Your daytime highs for tomorrow, a little bit warmer. We have low 70s making a comeback, and that's because of this ridge of high pressure as mentioned, and also these offshore winds. So that combination is going to stick around for a little while. What is typical for this time of the year? An average high, when you hear us refer to average or just seasonal, at 66 degrees for Ramona. Right on the money for tomorrow at 66, but we are looking at a lot more of those 70s popping up. 71 degrees for Fallbrook, the same for Miramar and for downtown. You also have 70 degrees for Chula Vista. 69 degrees will be the high for tomorrow, and that will be for Carlsbad. So still talking about temperatures that are going to be near to maybe a little above seasonal, as 65 to 66 is the average range for this time of the year west of the mountains. So we're starting to warm up a little bit more, especially with those 70s really dominating to kick off the weekend, and they're going to warm even more as we go into the second half of the weekend, and that will be into next week too. Let's talk about those winds. So the wind advisory went into effect as mentioned at 8 a.m. this morning for the inland valleys. It will keep going until 1 in the afternoon on Sunday, but there has been a little bit of a pushback. We're now looking at the peak of those wind speeds being late Saturday night through Sunday. Previously, it was late tonight through tomorrow, but we are looking at it push back just a little bit more. Now, when we look at the wind speeds, we are talking about sustained wind speeds in the teens as well as up to the 30s. That's going to be for the inland valleys. The strongest gusts are going to be east of the 15, especially along those coastal mountain slopes. So that's where we have about 35 to 55 miles per hour expected. For the mountains, stronger wind speeds out of the northeast, 25 to 35 miles per hour for sustained wind speeds, and gusts picking up into the 40s all the way to the 60s. But a few isolated spots could see gusts upwards of about 70 miles per hour. It's looking more favorable for maybe Campo, Tecate, and that would also be on Sunday morning. So talking about these strong winds, especially as we go from late Saturday night all the way through about Sunday morning. Down trees and power lines being an issue. That's because the ground's saturated. We've had a lot of rainfall recently, and because of that, some areas still pretty wet out there. And so it has time to dry out. So we're just now getting into that drier period, so we can't entirely rule out a down tree or power line. If you have anything that's not secure within these areas, it's a good idea, if you haven't done so already, to make sure that it is secure, because you don't want it to become a projectile. That becomes a hazard. Another thing to talk about is driving difficulties, especially along the 8. When you're seeing those semis out there, you get those crosswinds. If you're going to be moving along the 8, just keep in mind that you need to be careful out there and just being mindful of that driving difficulty, especially because we are talking about these winds extending all the way into most of the weekend. So we just want to keep you nice and safe. Let's talk about the fire weather concern though. That is not as high, and that's because of the ground already being saturated in a lot of spots because of our recent rainfall. So it is elevated. That puts it in the low to moderate range. We still have that fuel moisture that is actually pretty high. So because of that, we're not talking about that critical status when it comes to fire weather concerns with these Santa Ana winds, but it's just something to be mindful of. We're not entirely out of the woods, but we are looking at it being elevated rather than seeing an alert to reflect a fire weather concern across San Diego County. Let's set the clock in motion. Later on tonight, around 11:15 tonight, suggesting our in-house model that we could have some of those gusts upwards of about 55 miles per hour for Julian, 53 for Alpine, 50 miles per hour, that'd be for Pine Valley. Then we get into the rest of the weekend. We see more of that movement with those winds a little bit more towards the west, bringing in those gusts around 36 miles per hour for Ramona, Del Mar about 30 miles per hour, 43 miles per hour for Alpine, Fallbrook about 25 miles per hour. But as mentioned, the biggest concern is going to be right there along the coastal mountain slopes, as we do have some of these stronger wind speeds anticipated for those regions, and that's going to lead to those warmer temperatures, especially in the days ahead. Still looking at some pretty gusty winds around 725 for Saturday night. You got the 30s and 40s for Alpine and Ramona, also seeing that for Pine Valley, as well as 50 miles per hour for Julian. Still holding on to some gusty winds into the morning hours on Sunday. That's about 7:15. We have those gusts picking up in the 30s for Ramona, as well as for Alpine, 26 miles per hour for Fallbrook. We start to notice as we get into the evening hours on Sunday that the coverage with those winds backs off a little bit more, pushes more so towards the coastal mountain slopes. That's what it looks to be a little bit more focused. And at this point, we're also looking at some of those gusts out there still in the 20s and 30s, but not high enough to continue the wind advisory. Santa Ana winds will remain in our forecast into next week, but we're not anticipating it to be a strong wind event. They're going to weaken compared to what we're going to be dealing with over the weekend. That will take us all the way until Wednesday. Why is it happening? So you have this area of high pressure that's in our atmosphere, also this nearby low. You have two systems that circulate in different directions. You have this ridge of high pressure overhead, and that's about a clockwise circulation, and then you have counterclockwise with this low. Note the flow. The flow brings the air this way. And so that's why we're looking at Santa Ana winds in our forecast all the way into Wednesday of next week. It just looks to be strongest as we hit this weekend. It's what we call a tight pressure gradient. And so basically that creates those really strong winds that we're going to be feeling, but they're going to back off as we hit next week, but also still talking about the warmth that we're going to be feeling next week because of that ridge. That brings our 70s that we're going to hit this weekend, the low 70s for the coast, back into those low 70s all the way for next week. But you have the low 70s to start off the weekend for the inland valleys. You're in the mid to upper 70s by the second half of the weekend. You're back into the 80s by Wednesday of next week, and you take that all the way until Friday. You're also looking at weather impact alert days with those red boxes for the inland valleys as well as for the mountains. You have the 50s this weekend for your daytime highs. You have the 60s and 70s returning by next week for the mountains. You have the 60s to kick off the weekend for the desert, and if you want a little bit more warmth than that, you got the 80s on the way. That's going to start on Tuesday, and those 80s looking to last all the way until Friday. I hope you have a happy, wonderful, and safe weekend, and I'll see you right back here on Monday.